A cast-iron stove scraped across pine boards. Dust rolled out from under the legs. A small hand pressed flat against the wall behind it. The wall was warm. The wall was hollow. A single fingernail tapped twice, and the sound came back wrong. Not solid wood. Not stone. Something hidden. A folded note shook in the other hand. 4 words in pencil. Check behind the stove when you are alone. The cabin was 3 hours from the nearest town. Snow was already falling on the porch. No phone signal. No neighbors. No witnesses. She gripped a flat bar and pried at the seam. The wood cracked open. A wool blanket fell out first. Then a yellow envelope. Then a black tape recorder with a woman's name written in red ink. Her name was Clara Whitfield. She had been completely mute since she was 4. Stay with me on this one. Clara stood very still in the kitchen. The blanket was small. The blanket was hers. She had seen it in one photograph her whole life. One photograph on her grandfather's mantel. A baby wrapped in pale blue wool with white stars stitched along the edge. The same stars. The same wool. She lifted it to her face, and the smell of cedar and old smoke rose up. The cabin smelled the same. The blanket smelled the same. Something inside her chest turned over. She set the blanket on the counter. She set the envelope next to it. She set the tape recorder on top. 3 objects in a row. 3 pieces of a story she had never been told. Her grandfather Silas Whitfield had died 9 days earlier. A stroke at the kitchen table. The county found him with his coffee still warm. The lawyer called her 2 days later. The cabin was hers. The land was hers. The truck in the shed was hers. There was one condition. She had to come alone. She had to come within 30 days. She had to sign the papers in person when the sheriff arrived. Clara was 33 years old. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Missoula. She worked at a public library shelving books and answering questions on a small chalkboard she wore on a cord around her neck. She had not spoken a word out loud since she was 4 years old. Her father said she had fallen off a porch. Her father said she had hit her throat on a railing. Her father said the doctors had explained it all, and there was nothing more to do. Her father had a name in town. He was Marcus Whitfield. He owned 3 lumber yards and sat on the county council. He was the kind of man who shook hands with everyone and remembered the names of their dogs. He was also the only family Clara had left. Except for Silas. Silas was Marcus's father. Silas had stopped speaking to Marcus when Clara was 7. Clara did not know why. The 2 men passed each other in town and looked through each other like glass. Silas wrote her letters every birthday. Always the same line at the bottom. When you are ready, you will know where to find me. Clara had not understood that line until she opened the envelope at the lawyer's office and read the deed to the cabin. She had taken 3 days to pack a duffel bag. She had driven up the gravel road in Silas's old truck because her own car would not make the grade. She had brought a notebook, 2 pens, a thermos of coffee, and a small revolver Silas had left in the glove box. She had never fired a gun. She did not even know if it was loaded. Now she stood in his kitchen, looking at 3 objects that should not exist. She picked up the envelope first. The flap was tucked, not glued. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. A police report from the state of Montana. Dated October 11th, 1997. She did the math without thinking. She had been 4 years old that October. The report was thin. 2 paragraphs. A child, female, age 4, brought to St. Patrick Hospital in Missoula with severe trauma to the larynx and trachea. Father reported the child had fallen from a porch railing. Treating physician noted bruising consistent with manual pressure rather than blunt impact. Case flagged for child welfare review. A second line below in different handwriting. Case closed at request of family. No further action. Clara read it twice. She read it 3 times. The room around her went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. She had heard a version of that story every year of her life. A porch, a fall, a railing, a bad piece of luck. Now there was a piece of paper in her hand that said the doctor had not believed it. She set the report down carefully. She picked up the tape recorder. The label on the front was strips of masking tape with 2 words written across them in red ink. Helen Whitfield. Her mother. Her mother had died in childbirth. That was the story. That had always been the story. Marcus had told it the same way every time. A hemorrhage. The doctors did everything they could. A photograph by the fireplace. A grave Clara had visited twice. A name on a stone in the Missoula cemetery. Helen Ann Whitfield. Beloved wife. Beloved mother. 1968 to 1993. Clara had been born in 93. The police report was from 97. Her mother had been dead for 4 years when Clara's throat was crushed on a porch railing that did not match the bruises. So why did the tape recorder have her mother's name on it? Why was the writing so fresh? Why did it look like it had been waiting for her? She pressed the eject button. A cassette tape slid out into her palm. Side A was labeled in the same red ink. For Clara. Side B was blank. Her hand was shaking. She put the cassette back in. She set the recorder on the table. She did not press play yet. She walked to the door. She locked it. She walked to the window. She closed the shutters. She walked to the rear door of the cabin. She locked that one too. She came back to the table and sat down. She put her finger on the play button. The cabin was warm. The fire in the wood stove was still burning. Outside, the snow was thicker now. Inside, for the first time in 29 years, she was about to hear her mother's voice. The tape hissed for 3 seconds before it began. A woman cleared her throat. The voice was tired. The voice was careful. Clara felt the whole room narrow down to one small black machine on a kitchen table. The woman said her own name. Helen Whitfield. The woman gave a date. October 2nd, 1997. 9 days before the porch. 9 days before the hospital. 9 days before everyone in Missoula started saying Marcus Whitfield's daughter could not speak. Clara pressed pause. She felt her chest pulling in too hard. She did not understand how a dead woman could record a tape 4 years after she was buried. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to walk outside into the snow and feel something cold on her face. Instead, she pressed play again. Helen kept talking. Helen said she was hiding in a cabin owned by Silas Whitfield. Helen said she had been hiding for 4 years. Helen said the woman in the grave in Missoula was a cousin named Anna Linwood, who had died of an overdose 2 days after Clara was born. Helen said Marcus had paid the funeral home to switch the name on the stone. Clara stopped breathing for a moment. She did not know she had done it until her chest started burning. Helen kept talking. Helen said she had run because Marcus had told her on a Tuesday in the spring of 93 that no daughter of his was going to grow up calling some other man daddy. Helen said she had not understood what he meant. Helen said she had laughed and asked him what he was talking about. Helen said Marcus had not laughed back. Helen said the next morning she had taken Clara to the doctor for a checkup, and the nurse had asked about the bruise on Helen's collarbone, and Helen had said she fell. Helen said she had been saying she fell for 2 years by then. Helen said Silas had come for them on a Friday. Silas had driven them to a women's shelter in Spokane. Silas had given Helen $6,000 in cash and a new last name on a piece of paper a friend of his had made. Helen had taken Clara to Idaho. Helen had taken Clara to Oregon. Helen had taken Clara to a little town in eastern Washington where she worked nights at a diner, and Clara slept in a back room on a cot. Helen said for 4 years they had been safe. Helen said she had started to believe they were going to be okay. Then in September of 97, a man at the diner had recognized Helen. Helen said the man was a friend of Marcus from college. Helen said the man had smiled at her like nothing was wrong and asked how she was. Helen said the man had not told Marcus. The man had told Marcus's brother instead. Marcus's brother was the county prosecutor. Marcus's brother had driven across 2 state lines and knocked on Helen's door on the 1st of October. Helen said she had not opened the door. Helen said she had called Silas. Helen said Silas was driving to Washington that same night to bring them home to his cabin, where no one would find them. Helen said she was making this tape just in case. Just in case Silas did not get there in time. Just in case Marcus got there first. Helen said if Clara was hearing this, it was because Helen was no longer alive to tell the story herself. Helen said the most important thing was the box. Helen said Silas had built a hollow chamber behind the cast-iron stove. Helen said in the chamber was a baby blanket, so Clara would know it was really her mother's voice. In the chamber was a police report from the night. They would inevitably try to silence her. Helen said she did not know yet what they would do, but she knew they would do something. She had seen Marcus's face on the day she laughed at him. She had seen what was behind it. She had been running ever since. The tape went quiet for several seconds. Then Helen said one more thing. Helen said if Clara was old enough to find this on her own, then Marcus was still alive, and Marcus was still pretending. Helen said the only thing that could end it was Clara herself walking back into Missoula with the tape in her hand and asking why. The tape clicked off. Clara sat very still. She did not cry. Her hands were perfectly steady. She reached forward and pressed the rewind button so she could hear the date again. October 2nd, 1997. She did the math one more time. Helen had made the tape 9 days before Clara's voice was taken. Helen had made the tape in this cabin. Helen had survived the drive from Washington. Helen had made it here. Clara stood up slowly. She walked to the sink. She filled a tin cup with water from the pump. She drank the whole cup in one steady pull. She set the cup back down. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She walked to the stove and pulled a piece of split pine from the basket and laid it into the firebox. The fire took the wood with a soft crack. She closed the iron door. She brushed her hands on her jeans. She sat back down at the table. Outside, the snow had stopped. The light through the shutters was pale and clean. The cabin was warm and quiet. For 30 seconds, she was simply a woman who had inherited a cabin and made herself a cup of water. Then someone knocked on the door. Clara's head came up. The knock was 3 slow strikes. Heavy knuckles on heavy wood. The kind of knock a man uses when he wants you to know he is in no hurry. She had locked both doors. She had closed both shutters. She had not heard a vehicle on the gravel. She had not heard footsteps on the porch. She looked at the tape recorder on the table. She looked at the police report. She looked at the small blanket folded in a square. If you have made it this far, hit that subscribe button so the next chapter finds you. A man's voice came through the door. Come. Familiar. Lower than she remembered, but the same vowels and the same easy weight at the end of every word. Clara. Honey. Open the door. We need to talk about your grandfather's estate. It was Marcus. It was her father. Marcus was 3 hours from the nearest road in a cabin no one in town had visited for 10 years, and he had arrived in his work boots with no warning. The sheriff was not due for 6 days. Marcus had no business being here. Marcus had not even been at the reading of the will. Marcus had said he was too busy with the lumber yards to drive up. Marcus had said it on the phone to her, in 3 short voicemails she had played back twice. Marcus had also said one other thing. He had said, just give me a call when you get up there so I know you made it. Clara had not called. Clara had not told anyone where she was. Marcus should not have known the road. Marcus should not have known the gate. Marcus should not be standing on her porch saying her name like she was 9 years old. Clara moved very quietly. She slid the police report into the back of her notebook. She wrapped the tape recorder in her scarf and tucked it into her jacket. She picked up the small blanket and slid it under her shirt against her stomach. She crossed the room to the back door. She turned the deadbolt with her thumb. She listened. Marcus was still talking through the front door. Marcus was using his patient voice, the one he used at the council meetings when he was about to get his way, the one he used on the day she was 4 and woke up in a hospital with a bandage on her throat and her mother nowhere in the room. She had 3 things going for her. She knew the cabin and he did not. She had snow on the ground and he did not have her tracks yet. She had the truck keys in her pocket, and the truck was around the side of the shed where the porch could not see. She had one more thing too. She had a tape with her mother's voice on it, and a piece of paper a doctor had signed in 1997. The sheriff was due in 6 days. The drive back to Missoula was 3 hours. The phone signal started 15 miles down the road. If she could get to the truck. If she could get to the road. If she could get to a phone. Marcus knocked again. 4 strikes this time. Slower. He said, "I'm not going anywhere, Clara." He said, "I just want to talk." He said, "I am your father." The last word landed like a hand on a table. Clara opened the back door an inch at a time. The hinges Silas had oiled the week before he died did not make a sound. She slipped out into the cold. The snow was deeper than she expected, up to the top of her boots. Each step crunched a little. She moved toward the shed in a straight line because curves leave more tracks. The truck was where she had parked it. The driver door was unlocked. She climbed in and pulled the door shut as gently as she could. She did not start the engine. Not yet. She watched the corner of the cabin in the side mirror. Marcus came around the side. He was wearing his black wool coat and his work boots and his good leather gloves. He was carrying a tire iron in his right hand. He was not in a hurry. He was looking at the snow. He was reading her tracks the way a man reads a newspaper. He looked up and saw the truck. He smiled. The smile was the worst part. It was the same smile from the photograph on her dresser when she was 9 years old. It was the same smile from her high school graduation. It was the same smile from every birthday card. He started walking toward the truck. Clara turned the key. The truck coughed. The truck cawed. The truck roared. Marcus broke into a run. He was fast for a man of 60. He was faster than he should have been. Clara dropped it into first and let off the brake, and the truck lurched forward across the packed snow and out onto the gravel, and she did not look at the mirror again because she did not want to see the tire iron come down on the tailgate. It came down anyway. The metal rang. Something cracked. She did not stop. She drove. The gravel road from the cabin to the highway was 11 miles. The first 6 were single lane. The last 5 widened. There were 2 switchbacks where you could see down the mountain to the valley. Clara took the first switchback at 30 miles an hour because she did not know how to drive faster on snow. She took the second at 35 because she had to. Halfway down, she saw headlights behind her. White lights. Said hi. A truck. Marcus had not come up here alone. Marcus had a second vehicle. She kept driving. She gripped the wheel until her knuckles were the same color as the snow. She talked to herself in her head the way she had been talking to herself for 29 years because she could not talk out loud. She said, "You do not need a voice to drive this truck. You do not need a voice to push a tape into a sheriff's hand. You do not need a voice to point at a piece of paper. You have everything you need on your body. Just keep driving." The headlights closed the gap. The other vehicle was bigger. The other vehicle was newer. The road straightened where it dropped into the foothills. Clara felt the truck behind her hit her rear bumper. She felt her own truck shudder. She kept her foot on the gas. The truck behind hit her again. This time it pushed her sideways. The right wheels left the road. The right wheels found the ditch. The truck tilted. The truck did not roll. The truck stopped. The engine died. The other vehicle pulled up alongside her. The driver door opened. A man got out. It was not Marcus. It was Marcus's brother, the county prosecutor, Curtis Whitfield, the same man who had driven across 2 state lines in 1997 and knocked on Helen's door. He was wearing a county sheriff's department coat. The badge was clipped to the lapel. He was not the sheriff. He had no business in that coat. He smiled at her through the windshield. He had the same smile as Marcus. He held up a hand for her to stay in the truck. He walked around to the driver's side. He opened her door. Clara had been ready for fists. Clara had been ready for tire iron. Clara had not been ready for a man in a coat with a badge. Curtis spoke first. He said, "Your father is worried about you." He said, "You have been under a lot of stress." He said, "We're going to take you home and get you some help." He reached for her arm. Clara reached for her notebook on the seat. She held up the police report. She held it close to his face. She watched his eyes scan it. She watched his eyes get small. She watched his mouth open and close. She watched his hand come up from her arm and grab the paper. She let him take it. She had 2 more copies in the glove box. Silas had thought of that. Silas had thought of everything. While Curtis was looking at the paper, Clara reached into her jacket and pulled out the tape recorder. She set it on the dashboard. She pressed play. Her mother's voice filled the cab of the truck. Helen said the date. Helen said her name. Helen said the words Curtis had spent 29 years making sure no one heard. Curtis went still. He did not breathe. He did not move. He stared at the small black box on the dashboard, the way a man stares at a snake. Headlights came up the road behind them. Real sheriff headlights this time. Blue and red. 2 trucks. 3 deputies. Clara had not called them. Curtis had not called them. Marcus had not called them. Silas had called them. Silas had called them 9 days ago, before his stroke, before his coffee went cold on the table, before he sat down at his kitchen and stopped breathing. Silas had called the state attorney general in Helena and given a sworn statement and a tracking date. The date had been today. The state attorney general had asked the county sheriff to send deputies up the Bitterroot Road on this exact afternoon to escort his granddaughter back down. Silas had said it would not be safe for her to drive alone. Silas had been right. The deputies parked. The deputies got out. Curtis tried to step away from the truck. One deputy put a hand on Curtis's chest. Another deputy looked into the cab and saw Clara holding the tape recorder. The deputy looked at her face. He looked at the tape. He looked at the police report in Curtis's hand. The deputy said, "Ma'am, are you Clara Whitfield?" She nodded. The deputy said, "Your grandfather told us we should listen to whatever you wanted to play for us." She nodded again. She pressed rewind. She pressed play. She let Helen Whitfield speak for the 3rd time in 29 years, and this time 3 deputies and 1 prosecutor and a recording device on a deputy's shoulder all heard it together. 6 months later, the trial moved fast. Marcus Whitfield was charged with kidnapping, assault on a minor, and concealing a death. Curtis Whitfield was charged with obstruction and falsifying records. The doctor who had filed the original police report in 1997 was found in a retirement home in Helena. She was 81 years old. She came to court in a wheelchair. She read her own report out loud from the stand. She said she had been told by her supervisor at the time to close the case. She said she had never forgotten Clara's name. She said she had hoped someone would come back to it one day. She looked across the courtroom at Clara when she said it. Clara nodded at her once. Marcus took a plea. Curtis did not. Curtis got 12 years in the state prison in Deer Lodge. Marcus got 18. Helen Whitfield's grave was exhumed under a court order. The bones inside belonged to Anna Linwood, a 22-year-old woman who had been buried under Helen's name for 29 years. Anna's family in eastern Oregon came to the reburial. Clara stood at the back of the small chapel and let them have the front. Anna had a brother who was now 60. He came over to Clara afterward and shook her hand for a long time without saying anything. He understood that no one needed to fill the silence. Helen's body was never found. The investigators believe she had been buried somewhere in the Bitterroot foothills in October of 1997. The cabin sat on 300 acres of pine and rock. Clara walked every trail Silas had ever cut. She placed a small white stone at each spot that felt right. She did not know if any of them were the right one. She thought maybe that was the point. She kept the cabin. She moved out of her apartment in Missoula and brought her books up the mountain. She turned the front room into a library. She put the small blanket in a glass frame on the wall above the wood stove. She put the tape recorder in a drawer in the kitchen because she did not need to hear it again to know what was on it. She kept the police report in a folder with the other documents from the case. She kept Silas's letter in the front pocket of her jacket. Her voice did not come back. Some things do not come back. The doctors in Missoula explained that the damage from the original injury had been permanent, and there was no surgery that could undo it. Clara had not expected miracles. She had only expected the truth. She had gotten that. She started writing a book. She wrote it on a laptop at the kitchen table where she had first heard her mother speak. She wrote about a girl who could not say her own name, and a grandfather who built a hiding place behind a stove, and a mother who recorded a tape just in case. She wrote about the 4-hour drive down the mountain on the day everything finally became real. She wrote slowly. She wrote in the evenings after the fire was lit. The book took her 2 years to finish. On the last page, she wrote one line and then closed the laptop. The line was not for the readers. The line was for Helen. The line was 4 words long. She read it twice in her head before she saved it. The words were the same 4 words Silas had written on a folded note in pencil and tucked behind a cast-iron stove 29 years before. Check behind the stove when you are alone. She had checked. She had not been alone anymore. She never would be. The first snow of November fell across the porch the night she finished writing. She made a cup of tea and sat by the window. The cabin was warm. The fire was steady. The mountain outside was perfectly quiet. She put one hand against the glass and watched the snow. Somewhere down the valley, her father was sitting in a concrete room in Deer Lodge. Somewhere in a small chapel, a woman named Anna had a real name on a real stone. Somewhere on this mountain, her mother was sleeping under pine needles that had grown over her one fall at a time. Clara turned away from the window. She picked up her notebook. She wrote 3 words on the first blank page. They were the only 3 words she had ever needed. Then she closed the book, banked the fire, and went to bed.